CBS almost killed the Mary Tyler Moore Show over whether Mary Richards could be divorced, a decision that quickly turned into a standoff between the network, the creators, and Mary Tyler Moore herself. Executives warned that it could damage Moore's image, audiences would reject her, and that the show would never make it past a shortened first season. And as strange as that sounds now, at the time, it was a serious problem. Because this wasn't just another show for Mary Tyler Moore. What she did next meant everything. After the Dick Van Dyke Show, her career hadn't gone the way people expected. She had taken a shot at Broadway with Breakfast at Tiffany's, and it was a disaster. The reviews were brutal, and audiences booed her. Despite what she later admitted in interviews, the whole ordeal hit her a lot harder than she let on. The handful of forgettable movies Moore appeared in only added to her concerns about where her career was going. And when she was literally pushed aside by a swarm of photographers at a movie premiere to make way for the new television star at the time, Marlo Thomas, it really hit her. She was becoming an afterthought in Hollywood. At that point, Moore was looking for anything that could get her career back on track. So when she was asked to reunite with Dick Van Dyke for a television special, she jumped at the chance to spend an evening of fun with old friends. The special, Dick Van Dyke and the Other Woman, was meant to be light entertainment, but it ended up doing something more important. It reminded people just how good she really was. For the first time in a while, she wasn't being compared to who she used to be. She was right there with Van Dyke again, confident, funny, and completely in control. As soon as CBS saw the ratings and heard the reaction from fans to seeing her on TV again, the network quickly offered Moore her own sitcom, where she would be the headliner instead of being the other woman. Even with that momentum, there was still a lot of pressure on what came next. This wasn't just another opportunity, it was her shot to prove she could carry a show on her own, and from the network's point of view, that made the risk even bigger. What happened in those early meetings at CBS almost derailed the show, but the idea they were arguing over didn't start there. It began a few weeks earlier at Mary Tyler Moore and Grant Tinker's home in the Hollywood Hills, where Jim Brooks and Alan Burns showed up with what they knew was a risky pitch. They weren't trying to create another version of Laura Petrie. That had already been done, and it had worked perfectly for the Dick Van Dyke Show. What they were interested in was something that felt closer to real life, something that reflected what people were actually dealing with in 1970.
Because Bill is coming tonight, it doesn't mean we're getting married.
I want to see you married, Mary.
Well, me too.
Because I'm married.
Most shows at the time still leaned on safe, familiar setups where nothing ever veered too far off course, and everything was neatly resolved by the end of the episode. That wasn't what Brooks and Burns had in mind at all. They were coming off the groundbreaking series Room 222, where they had already started pushing into more grounded, real-world storytelling, and they wanted to take that even further with this new show. So instead of building a character around a traditional sitcom setup, they started with a different question. If Mary Richards was going to be starting over, what actually caused that? They decided Mary would be divorced, working as a gossip columnist in a Los Angeles newspaper. To them, it wasn't shocking. It just felt like the most real and honest choice they could make. A divorced Mary wasn't someone the audience was supposed to feel sorry for, and she definitely wasn't a failure. She was someone who had tried the life she was expected to have, figured out it wasn't for her, and had the guts to walk away. That gave the character a real backstory, and it made her independence feel like something she actually chose. Mary Tyler Moore understood that immediately.
She's not my aunt.
Well, that's right, Bess. I'm not really your aunt, but, well, your mother and I have known each other for a long time, and sometimes...
Bess is right, Mary. We try to be very truthful in our family. You're not her aunt.
She had gone through a divorce herself years earlier, and when Brooks and Burns explained the idea, she connected with it right away. It didn't feel controversial to her at all. It just felt real, and more importantly, like something television hadn't really done before. She liked it enough to take the risk. Grant Tinker was on board too, which meant Brooks and Burns weren't walking into CBS alone. They had the star of the show and one of the most respected executives in television backing the idea before it ever reached a network. And for a moment, it looked like everything was lining up. The idea made sense, the people involved believed in it, and it felt like the kind of show television was eventually going to have to move toward anyway. But once that idea left the living room in Hollywood and made its way to CBS in New York, everything changed. The meeting took place at CBS headquarters in New York, inside BlackRock, the network's imposing black granite tower in Midtown Manhattan. And in a lot of ways, that building represented exactly what Brooks and Burns were up against. They had been in pitch meetings before, but this one felt different. The two producers could sense the tension in the room right away, as if everyone was waiting for something to go wrong. They had flown in from Los Angeles with Arthur Price, Mary Tyler Moore's business manager, to present the show to CBS programming chief Mike Dan and his team. Dan had a reputation for being obsessed with ratings, and he wasn't shy about it. He had a long-running rivalry with NBC's Paul Klein, where the two of them would go back and forth trading insults in the press and in personal letters. After 13 years of CBS dominance, NBC was nipping at CBS's heels in the ratings race, and Dunn was feeling the pressure. With his position at the network on shaky ground, he was in no mood to take unnecessary risks with his programming. Grant Tinker wasn't able to make the trip, which meant Brooks and Burns were carrying the pitch on their own, and it wasn't going well. None of the CBS executives in the room had laughed at a single thing the two were pitching, and when they said they wanted to divorce Mary, the room fell silent. "You want to divorce Mary?" Dan couldn't believe what he was hearing. This isn't just a character in a TV sitcom. In the mind of the executives, this is Mary Tyler Moore, the same woman audiences had watched for years on The Dick Van Dyke Show. You're not changing a backstory, you're changing how people see her. The objections come at them fast. The audience will think she divorced Dick Van Dyke. Why not make her more like Doris Day or Lucille Ball? Why do you even need to say her age? Lucy never reveals her age. And just when it seemed like the meeting couldn't get any worse, CBS brings in its research department, claiming audiences would never accept a divorce lead in a sitcom. At this point, it's pretty clear this is going nowhere. Brooks and Burns try to push back, explaining the character would still be likable, that the audience would understand her, and that this is what real life looks like in the modern world. But none of the suits at CBS were buying any of it, stopping just short of saying that their vision for the series was doomed to fail. From their point of view, this isn't about realism, it was about protecting Mary's image. By the time the meeting is winding down, everyone is still so fixated on the divorce part that they haven't even had the chance to pitch their ideas for the rest of the show. As Brooks, Burns, and Price get up to leave, Dan pulls Price aside and makes it clear just how serious this is. These guys, whoever they are, could end up killing the show. Get rid of them. Price told him he would discuss the issue with Tinker, but he didn't think changing producers was likely. Regardless, he knew one thing was certain: that did not go well. The two producers had spent months building this idea, something they genuinely believed in, and now they're being told it's not just risky, it's something the network flat out doesn't want. On the flight back home to Los Angeles, Brooks and Burns seriously consider walking away. They figured they could always go back to Room 222, which was struggling in the ratings but was still highly thought of by the critics, and Burns could return to his movie career. They knew if they stayed, Mike Dan would make their lives miserable. Is this really worth it? But when they got home and settled back into their temporary office at CBS Studio Center, they started to have second thoughts. Quitting the project would look bad for everyone, and they didn't want the gossip magazines to publish stories that made it seem like they couldn't get along with Mary Tyler Moore and Grant Tinker. They needed to find a way to keep CBS happy without losing what they were trying to do. After hearing what the executives at CBS had said about Brooks and Burns, Tinker simply shrugged it off. He knew he had the upper hand because the network wanted desperately to work with Mary again. There was no way he was going to fire the producers, but he was willing to compromise on the divorce angle. So they decided to come up with a new concept for the show, one that would satisfy the network's concerns while still delivering a series that was fresh and modern and worthy of where Mary was trying to go. After a week of brainstorming ideas, they agreed that instead of Mary being divorced, she would be coming off a big breakup from a long-term relationship. They were never thrilled with the idea of Mary working for a nasty boss at a newspaper office in Los Angeles to begin with. Now, she would live in the city in Minneapolis to get away from the overused Los Angeles and New York settings while working in a local TV newsroom. Minnesota's harsh winters with lots of snow and cold weather coats and jackets would give them something different to work with visually. And putting the show in a newsroom gave them built-in conflict, especially since it was an underdog station constantly struggling with ratings.
You know what? You got spunk.
Well,
I hate spunk.
As part of his research, Burns spent time at a local Los Angeles news station, where the inspiration for the character Ted Baxter was born. He also saw that producers stashed bottles of liquor in their desk and thought, our producer character has got to do that. They created two worlds for Moore to surround her with a strong supporting cast, her workplace and her home. Similar to what worked for the Dick Van Dyke Show, only this time it was a single woman as a star. So what looks like a compromise on paper is really more of a workaround, a way to keep the network off their back without giving up what actually mattered. But there was one more piece to this that made a big difference. When Mary agreed to do the show, she had several conditions. She wanted the character to feel closer to who she was in real life, because she didn't fully trust herself to play something completely different. And just as important, she didn't want it to be a one-woman show. Even though her name was on it, she wanted a strong supporting cast, people she could play off of, not just a setup where everything depended on her carrying every scene. And that ended up being one of the things that made the show work, because it gave everything a more natural feel and allowed those other characters to shine.
You don't think he's...
Dad, Lucille Harris is a woman.
Oh, good. I'd much rather have a woman be Man of the Year than some guy named Lucille.
From CBS's point of view, they had solved the problem. Mary wasn't divorced, the risk was gone, and the show looked like something audiences were already comfortable with. But when it actually aired, it didn't really feel like the safe version they thought they had approved. Because even though they never used the word divorce, the entire story is still built around the same idea. Mary is coming out of a serious relationship, she's starting over in a new city, and she's trying to figure out how to build a life for herself on her own. And that's what Brooks and Burns were trying to do all along. In a way, it's kind of like what Rod Serling did with The Twilight Zone, finding a way to tell the stories he wanted to tell without saying it outright so he could get around CBS and the censors. And instead of pushing people away, that's what connected. Which is what makes this whole thing kind of ironic. CBS thought they were avoiding a risk, but the version of the show that actually worked came from the exact idea they didn't want. And that's the part that almost didn't happen.